Hi, I'm Christopher, and welcome to the Cabin Boy Knits Woolcast. This episode is all about dyeing yarn with pomegranates. I'll talk about which part of the pomegranate we use for dyeing. We'll talk about the medicinal effects that pomegranates have, and also touch upon the history of pomegranates as well. So sit back, grab your favorite drink, and let's start dyeing some yarn. The holiday season reminds me of pomegranate. We always had some on the table during the holiday season, and I didn't know at the time when I was a teenager all the different uses that you can have of pomegranate. I've found a renewed love for it through the dyeing process. And the pomegranate plant, actually, there's two key parts of the plant that you can use for dyeing. One is the flower. I don't have access to the flowers for the pomegranate plants because they come primarily from Middle East, from India. India is actually the largest producer of pomegranates. And the pomegranates that I get on my table are from California or Arizona. And the period of time that they are optimum for picking is anywhere between October and January. So that's why we see them on the table on holiday season. So I don't have access to the flower. However, I do have access to the skin. And that's the part that we use for dyeing. When you look inside a pomegranate, you know, the seeds are absolutely beautiful. The fruit's really gorgeous. And you would think that that would be naturally something that we'd use for dyeing. But it doesn't take very well to the fiber. So we're going to be using the skin. And I'll talk about how we skin a pomegranate for dyeing purposes. So what you will need. You need your pomegranates. You'll also need some bowls. I have 3 bowls. One of them is for the seeds. So I can keep those because I want to eat them later on. They're great in salads, and the juice is also fantastic. I want a compost bowl. So this bowl, everything that goes in here is going to be, I'm going to use for composting. And I have another bowl, and I'm going to put the skin in here. So the pomegranate skin is going into this bowl. You'll need a cutting board and a couple knives. I like a paring knife or a small knife, similar to a paring knife. And then I like cutting the skins with a larger knife. And you'll need something to wipe up after yourself because pomegranate juice can get all over the place. And it will, if you leave it sitting on wood or surfaces, it can start to stain. So you want to wipe that up. It's also important to look at what you're wearing when you're dyeing pomegranate. Don't wear a white t-shirt. And even though I say that it's, you know, we're not using the seeds or the juice for dyeing purposes, it will stain a shirt. So wear something that you don't care about getting dirty. I just have the regular plaid shirt on, not too bothered about getting this one stained. So this is everything that you need for the prep. We'll get into the pots and pans and everything else after we get our skins ready. So what I like to do is you look at the pomegranate, it's got one obvious end on it. The other is the piece that was used to break off from the tree. And so it's that end that we're interested in firstly. So we've got the end that protrudes out, and then you've got the end that was used to snap off the tree. This is the end that we're going to be using to cut around. So what I like to do is I like to cut about, just put your index finger and your thumb together, put it around the hole. That's probably around the size that I'd like to cut around. And you don't want to dig too deep, but just below the surface. And so we'll get going on that. So you can see this is what it looks like. This is the top of it, and I've just cut in just below the outer surface. The next thing you want to do is when you feel around the pomegranate, there are spines that you can feel, and they go all the way around. And so what I want to do is I want to cut along the spine, and I want to cut 2/3 of the way down. So we'll start that. And use the same motion that you would use to cut an apple. Forgot one here. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to open it up. I'll hold it over my seed bowl. And we want to just take it, get our nail down, and peel it back like this. So you can see the beautiful fruit inside of it. Now there are a number of ways to actually extract the fruit from the pomegranate, and I like to get my hands in it. Some people will hold it over and tap it with a spoon or wooden spoon. I find that when you do that, you sometimes will pop or burst the pomegranate seeds, and I don't want to do that. So I like touching everything with my hands anyway. So I get my hands right in there, and just very lightly, I just knock off the pomegranate seeds. And you're just using a light touch. And if by doing that, you won't break any of the seeds. If you're breaking popping the seeds, you know that you have pushed too hard, and just lighten up your touch. But they will come out. You just go through each one. See the gorgeous fruit inside. I just run my finger or my thumb over it and get that out of the way. And you'll see that there's a membrane here, a white membrane. If it falls in, don't worry about it. Just pick them out. If you are concerned about having too many in, and you want to make sure that all of them are out, what you can do is you can fill the bowl with water. And what that does is these little white pieces float to the top, and then you can just skim them off. So it's a very easy way of removing them. So this can take a little while, and but I like it. It's it's not difficult work. It's easy. So you work your way through each one, and you can pop a seed in your mouth while you're doing it. You should be rewarded by when you're going through this process. A lot of people don't eat the seeds, and that's too bad because the seeds have a lot of fiber in them, so they're actually quite good for you. And this will take a little while. It also would warn you that your fingers, doing this process, and I think this is why people might not do it, your fingers can get sticky just from the juice. But if you do it and you're close to your sink, it's not a problem. The use of pomegranates in dyeing go way back to 1000 BC, and pomegranates have been cited in Christianity, in the Testament, the Old Testament, in the Quran, in Hindu scripture. There's been pictures of pomegranates in King Tut's tomb as well. So it's been referenced a lot. Some religions look at it as a symbol of fertility. And so it's been used on a lot of paintings to symbolize fertility. Pomegranates were introduced into North America in the 18th century. And for those Americans who have been to Monticello, or those who have been, not necessarily Americans, but for those of you who have been to Monticello, you might remember reading that Thomas Jefferson had pomegranate trees at Monticello. If you haven't been to Monticello, I strongly recommend that you go. It's amazing. It's quite a place. So I finished cutting up one pomegranate, and what I want to do now is I want to get rid of the flesh, this white piece, because I don't want that in when I'm dyeing. So I'll just cut that off, put that into my compost bowl. And then what I will do is take my other knife. I can use a small knife, but I prefer the larger knife. And I'll just cut them up into small pieces. So, about this size. And I'll put that into my bowl for pomegranate skins. And the reason I cut it up into smaller pieces is because I want to dry it before I start dyeing with it. So I just put it in smaller pieces, and I usually dry it overnight. If I don't have a lot of time and I want to get through this a lot faster, what I'll do is I'll put them on a baking sheet and stick them in the oven and put them on at around 250 degrees and 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And that will dry them out. And I'll leave them in there for about an hour and then take them out. I find that the color is better when you're using dried pomegranate. So it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, but it's I find it relaxing. Now you probably wonder when you're looking at this pot how I can possibly have so many seeds in here. And I started doing this last night. So I've put some, it was about a day and a half ago. So I dried the pomegranates overnight and then I've started my dye pot. So that's why I have so many seeds. So what I'm going to do now is I've got some white flesh in here that I haven't picked out yet. So I'm going to put it in the water. It's actually beautiful. They look like tiny little cranberries. So I put them in the water, and I hope you can see this on the camera. But the white pulp has definitely come up to the top. So it's just very, very easy to scoop off. Once we've peeled the pomegranate skin off of the pomegranate, let it dry overnight, and then I put it into a pot and let it simmer. I fill the pot to the top. I've used 6 pomegranates, and they vary in size. And it's when you buy it in different stores, you're not guaranteed the same pomegranate because there's over 760 varieties of pomegranate, and you can't really. It's not that obvious when you're looking on the outside. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. They all contain the same property of tannin in the skin, and the tannin. If you remember from earlier episodes on other topics, tannin is really important for us when we're dyeing yarn because you've got the tannin in it, that acts as a mordant. And the mordant is the agent that binds the color to the fiber. And so I could simply not use anything other than the pomegranate on my yarn. And the color will bind, but it won't bind as bright as I want to or as intense as I want to. So I'm going to be using the alum for that. I'm also going to be using iron. And so in terms of how much do we use, I've got 6 pomegranates I'm using in a big pot with water, filling the water to the top. I've let it simmer for 2 hours and then I let it sit overnight. You don't have to let it sit overnight, but it just worked out that way for me. So it's been sitting overnight, it's been simmering, and I've used 6 pomegranate skins inside of the dye pot. And the alum that I'm going to be using will be 10% of the weight of the entire yarn that I'm doing. So I'm going to be dyeing 10 skeins of yarn. I've let my dye pot simmer for a couple of hours now, and I'm going to take it off the stove. I let it cool down, and I'm going to strain it because you don't want the skin in the dye pot when you're dyeing the yarn because it can tangle up in your yarn and it can pull it. So it's a lot easier and I think safer on the yarn if you take the skin out of it. So I'm going to do that now. And before I do that, I just want to show you what the color is. So just think about it. This is the color of the skin. And what color do you think will come out? It's almost a dark brownish hue color to it. Put that in the strainer. Oh, it's really dark. The color is really dark, and I think it's for two things. One, I used 6 pomegranates, and I left it overnight as well. So it's had time to really take in the color. And there's all the pulp left, or the skin left of the pomegranate. Just try to get all of this out. And this will go in my compost container. So I want to make sure we get all of this out. Pour this back in. And I'm going to let it warm up a little bit and before I put the alum in. And what I like to do with the alum when I'm adding it to the dye pot is I'll take out some of the water or some of the dye bath, add the alum in a little mason jar, shake it up in the mason jar, and then put it back in. Because I find that it mixes a lot better that way. So let's put this on the stove. So now it's time to add the alum. What I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my mason jar in. This is warm, it's not hot. You don't want it to be boiling. So I've just added a little bit in. And remember I was talking about the ratio is 10 to 1. So I will put in, I'm using 10 skeins of yarn in this dye pot. So 100 skeins, 100 grams each. 100 grams converted into tablespoons is around 7. So I'll put in 7 tablespoons. And I'm going to add it into my mason jar. Five, 6, 7. Then what I want to do is I want to mix it up. It really hasn't changed a lot. You can see a yellow hue in it, but it hasn't really changed the color. So what I'm going to do now is add my yarn. It's important not to add it when it's boiling or too hot. So I like to do it when it's just warm, just a little bit warmer than room temperature, because you don't want to shock the yarn. And again, this is wet, so it's very, very important for you to have your fiber wet when you put it in, because it helps absorb the color. So I'm going to put this in. I've put the yarn in, and it's going to be sitting in there for about an hour on warm, so just under a simmer, because I don't want it too hot. If it starts to boil, it's going to damage the yarn, and it could change the property or the color of the pomegranate as well. So we'll check it. We'll come back in 20 minutes and see what it looks like. It's been about 25 minutes and it's time to check the yarn. I think it's ready. I like the color that I'm seeing, and I'm going to pull it out now. So what I do before I pull the yarn out is I will fill up a bucket with liquid, and I'll fill it up with water, and the water will be slightly lower temperature than the dye pot, because I don't want to shock the yarn. You don't put it in cold water, put it in warm water. Again, so you want to minimize the shock to the yarn. What color do you think it's going to be? On 3. 1, 2, 3. It's a fantastic green color. It's really nice. Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. I actually thought when I was putting this in, usually I get a yellow color out of my pomegranate, and this is green. You usually get this green when you add iron to it. I didn't add iron to this dye bath. I actually added alum to it. And so this is a great green. I'm really happy with it. So one of the variables that had an impact on the color was the pH balance of the water that I used. I used this water out of my tap, and it goes through a purifier and a softener, and so that definitely will have a color or an impact on the color. Sometimes, or most of the time, I just use rainwater when I'm doing this. But there's an ice storm going on right now. So I'm saving the water from outside, and anyway, it was a fantastic green color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of it out at the same time now, because I want the color to be consistent across all of my skeins of yarn. Because if you're doing a sweater quantity, you definitely want to have a similar color, if that's what you're going for, and that's what I'm going for. So I want to make sure that the color again is similar. So this is one dye lot. And I put 5 skeins of yarn in. The other thing I'm going to do is, the other thing I will do is I'll press down just a little bit, not too much because you don't want to felt the yarn. I'll press down a little bit on the yarn, and I'm going to pour some of the liquid back into the dye pot because I don't want to waste it. Probably a little more liquid I can get out of this. There, and I'm almost back up to the same line. Oh, I love that grain. It's fantastic. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another 5 skeins in, and that will be my 10 skeins. And I have another pot over here, and this pot is not quite ready yet. This is pomegranate, and I'm going to be adding iron as a mordant to it. And we'll look at the color and see whether or not it's different from the green color that we have on these skeins. This definitely has a yellow hue to it. And we have to remember, the color that we see right now may not be the final color. So we're going to wash it. After I finish washing it, I'll bring it back. I have my second pot going right now, and it is the one that has the pomegranate rinds in it, which I've just drained, and I'm going to be adding iron. And so iron is the mordant that will be used. And I make my own mordant with respect to an iron bath. And what I do is I put in 1/3 vinegar and 2/3 water, and then I have old nails, and I let that sit for about a month. And then I just keep topping it up. It looks like I probably need to top it up again. And you have to be very careful when you're using iron, because it really can change the color of your dye bath quite quickly. And so I just add a tiny bit at a time, and I keep checking the color of the dye bath to see how much of an impact it's had on it. So when we look at it, here's the color that we have right now. And you know, this is pomegranate's an interesting one because you see the color that we have without any mordant in it. I had alum, didn't really change the dye pot color a lot, but when the yarn came out, it was a beautiful green color. I'm anticipating that when I add the iron, I'm going to darken it, so I should be getting a slightly darker green to it. But again, you have to be careful not to add too much, because if you do, it will turn black or it'll turn a dark gray color. And I'm not really going for that color, so hopefully you add it in, you stir it, you let it sit for a while, and you check it, see whether or not the colors had an impact. You can also tell by the smell as well. I can definitely smell the iron in there. So we're going to let this sit for, I'm going to stir it, we're going to let it sit for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to put the yarn in. After I put the iron in, I let it sit for 20 minutes, look at it, see if that's the color that I want. And again, you can't be 100% precise. It's going to be a little bit different once it starts to react with the yarn. But I like the color that I saw. So I put the yarn in, I let the yarn sit for about half an hour, and we'll take a look and see what it looks like. Are you ready? So it came out a nice brown color, very nice brown color. What I'm going to do is, I'm happy with this color, so I'm going to take this, put it in my pot. I've got a little bit of, just a tiny bit of water in here, just so the yarn doesn't, the very first skein of yarn isn't chocked too much. And I'm going to wash it, because you get the color that you pull out sometimes isn't exactly the color that you see after you wash it. So I'm going to wash it, look at it, see if I'm happy with that color, and then we'll go from there. So I've washed the yarn right after the dye pot, and I wash it in water that is very similar to the temperature of the dye pot. I let dye pot usually reduce it in temperature, and again, you don't want to shock the yarn. So I'm very happy with the result. So we started off with a pomegranate that looked like this, and then through the dyeing process we used alum and we used iron. So when we look at the alum is the one on the green one, and the iron is the brown. And they look great, but it's incredible how the mordant can really change the color of the yarn. So I'm very happy with that. I'm going to keep those. I'm going to dye some more this afternoon, and we'll see where we go. But just to recap, so in the pot, the first pot that I used with the alum, I used 6 pomegranates, and I used just the skin of the pomegranate. And I'm keeping the seeds to put on salads and to make drinks out of. But it was the skin that we used. Put that in a large pot, filled the pot up 3/4 of the way, and let it simmer for about 2 hours. I actually let mine simmer overnight, or set overnight. And then when you're ready, you put your wet yarn in. And if you put your wet yarn in, you can either pre-mordant the yarn. So that is putting your yarn in a pot with alum and letting that soak for a while, and then putting it in the dye bath. What I actually did though is I put the mordant or the alum right in my dye bath. And what that did was it allowed me to put my wet yarn in right away. So I put the wet yarn in the dye bath that had mordant in it, which was alum, and it was 10% of the weight of all of the wool that I was putting in. And for my second pot, the smaller pot, I decided to add iron as a mordant. And I got this beautiful brown color out of it. And you have to be very, sensitive to the amount of iron that you put in the pot, because it can turn it a dark grayish black very quickly. And so you just put in a little bit at a time. I probably put in the equivalent of 2 tablespoons in, and I made that solution, or the iron solution, through 2/3 water, 1/3 vinegar, and some rusty nails, and I let it sit for 2 months. And you can keep reusing it. So it looks like my mason jar is probably only 1/3 left, so I'll have to add some more vinegar and add some more water as well. So that's dyeing with pomegranates. You go from a state like this to peeling it, to making your dye bath and coming out with these great colors. And so you can get pomegranates at your local grocery store. And the winter time is the easiest time to get the pomegranates. So I'd encourage you to go out and try it. If you have any questions, please just fire them off to me. Happy to answer any questions that you do have. And I'd love to see your dyeing process as well and see how your yarn has turned out. So take care, everyone. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.